So now we switch to New York, and it's great to say hello to Sean. Hello, Sean.
Hello, Lucas.
So thank you very much for joining in. And could you briefly introduce yourself? Because I heard a lot about you, but it's always great to also hear from you how you introduce yourself.
Okay, well, I hope it was a good introduction. My reputation precedes me. I'm Sean A. Mulvihill. I do improv. I'm an actor. I recently directed a film called Act Social, which I know that you've seen. And the film's about improv and the philosophy behind improv. And it's something fascinating to me that I've been really digging into for the last 3 years or so.
So I like the title, Act Social. So why did you choose this title?
Well, I like salsa dancing and swing dancing, and we call that social dancing. And so I thought about improv, and it's like, well, it's basically the same thing, except with acting. So I was like, us, but no one ever calls improv social acting. So I said, oh, I'm going to call it that. So that's why I called the movie Act Social.
Why is it social acting? So why is it not? I do understand classical acting. I do understand improvisational acting, but why social acting?
Well, because like the definition of social dance is you would go to a social event and there would be people there that you don't know, and the music would be playing. And since you both know the dance steps, you would ask someone, oh, would you like to dance? And you would dance together and have a nice social, enjoyable time. And improv, if you go to an improv jam as an actor, it's the same thing. A group of improvisers show up, there's a stage there, and you get suggestions from the audience, and people who don't know each other can improvise together and have a nice, social, enjoyable time. So it's something that in a social setting is quite enjoyable.
I really like that framing. So you said it's about applied improvisation. So why? What was your motivation to start, doing a film on applied improvisation?
Well, I guess I have some idea that I'm a bit of a philosopher in my mind. I don't read tons of old texts, dusty tomes of books or anything, but I occasionally read more contemporary works like Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. And back in 2000, actually right after I graduated from undergrad, 2004, I started making a documentary about enlightenment and inner peace. And I did interview Eckhart Tolle for that movie and a number of other authors. And what we sort of concluded in that movie about happiness, not to give too much of a spoiler, the movie is called Living Luminaries on the Serious Business of Happiness. And so what we sort of conclude is that there's all these different traditions, different ways that you can approach happiness. But essentially it's an inner journey. And it's all about sort of your mental interpretation of the events that occur in your life. And meditation is a great practice to learn to be able to sit with whatever happens in your life. And so essentially, I believe that mindfulness at that time was the pinnacle. If you did mindfulness, then you would just be a much happier person. But then mindfulness over the last 15 years has become a buzzword, and sort of, everyone's doing yoga and mindfulness, and, all these Instagram, influencers are putting all these mindfulness quotes on their page, but on the same page, they're putting these asinine other comments and just bashing other people and calling out, whoever it is, and just treating other people like horribly. And I said, okay, so you love yourself, but you clearly don't realize that if you really were mindful and meditating, you would realize that self is not the little self, the little me. It's a we, because the self, we're not separate from our environment, and that includes other people, including the people you disagree with and dislike. So just like our carbon dioxide that we exhale is the breath that the tree takes in. the tree exhales oxygen, which is our breath. So by the same token, there's a great old saying that says, what is the evil man but the good man's job? And so there's a symbiotic relationship between different kinds of people in life. And I just saw, especially in the United States, with a lot of the political stuff going on here, there was a lot of discord where people just wouldn't even talk to each other. There was no dialogue at all. And so in 2017, I started taking an improv and at UCB, which is a popular school here, started by Amy Poehler. And I realized that the number one rule of improv, yes, and was sort of the basis for a productive conversation as well. And I wondered if anyone else had thought this. And so I just started the same way I started my other documentary 15 years ago or so. I just started writing letters to famous improvisers and saying, hey, have you thought about this? Does this, would you be interested in talking about this on camera? And most of the people ignored me, just like with my other thing. But then Colin Mockery, who's one of my heroes from Whose Line Is It Anyway? His agent writes me back like, absolutely, we're on board with this. This is an amazing thing. And like a couple of weeks later, I'm on the phone with Colin and we're talking about it. And he invites me to come and film an interview with him and come to his improv show. And we formed a friendship. And at that time, we had never heard the phrase applied improvisation. Either of us. He hadn't, I hadn't. And the weekend that we were to meet, I had talked to a lady named Teresa Dudek about maybe finding some other interview subjects, because she's writing a thing about Keith Johnstone. And Keith Johnstone's a big name in improvisation. And she said, well, I just published a book called Applied Improvisation. I said, oh, what's that? And she's like, oh, it's where you use improv for things other than performance. And she's like, my friend Barbara, she just wrote a chapter about conflict resolution called From Hell No to Yes And. And I was like, oh. And she's like, oh, and she's in New York, you should interview her. So I go and I take the camera. I interviewed her even before I went to interview Colin. And then she told me about Bob Culhan, who wrote this book, Getting to Yes And he told me about Caesar Jamie in Chicago, and he introduced me to people at Second City. And so people just kept introducing me to other people, and it turned into this movie.
Now that's great. It sounds like you improvised in a way. So you started somewhere and see what happens next, and it's in every step you understand a bit more. And I think it's a wonderful metaphor for exploring the field in a way. And it's interesting that with many people I talked about implied improvisation is that most of the people do not know that, so that you can apply the techniques and the mindset and skills of theater and jazz in different contexts. And then they find, there's a whole community on that. And that's interesting because it feels to me like everyone is like enlightened, like, oh my God, there are some other people like me who discovered that. How did you feel, finding that there are other people doing research and trainings on applied improvisation?
I was inspired by that. And I was really curious to know, well, mainly if they were getting any results that were measurable. Are there any quantitative results that you can say, okay, well, we did this research study, and I had trouble actually finding anything at first. And then I met Kristen Kruger in Chicago, and it turned out in 2014 she actually did a scientific study. But again, it was anecdotal. So like she did surveys, asked the people, how would you rank your level of depression right now? And they say 10. And then they do improv for 45 minutes. And then she say, how would you rank your level of depression now? And so I think that's how the study went, basically. And so, based on these kinds of studies, she realized like, wow, people are improving their self-esteem, they're lowering their depression, and their self-image is improving marginally. And so she's like, wow, this is, sort of something I can publish. So she published that in a journal. And then I think other people that were doing applied improv for businesses started to use that to sort of sell their, their product. And at the same time, then this Dr. Charles Lim in San Francisco started doing the functional MRI scans with jazz musicians. And then he switched over to do it with improv comedians. And so that's why we were able to get Colin in there to get his brain scanned.
So what happened when you scanned his brain? What was the insight for those people who did not watch the movie yet?
Okay, well, spoiler alert. Basically what happens is that when you improvise, if you're a trained improviser, essentially what's happening is your prefrontal cortex is actually shutting itself down. So the part of the brain that's responsible for conscious self-monitoring. So when you're learning a skill, you're like, okay, if you're learning to drive a car, you're like, okay, so I have to turn left. Okay, so I have to put on the turn signal. Okay, now I have to turn the wheel. Like that voice, that's conscious self-monitoring. That's all in the prefrontal cortex. So when you're improvising, basically that voice gets turned off. In an expert improviser, it's turned off completely. And essentially that frees you up to be creative without worrying about the result. And, you see, it looks like you see a lot of the same things when people are kind of in the flow state of something that they're really good at, that they've practiced a lot. And so essentially, yeah, you're able to control your brain, essentially.
Now it's great that you did the whole journey, because I myself had to travel everywhere, also to the US to find the people. So it was great to watch all these different studies that you found. So after your journey, what is your insight? What is the aha? What is the results? Because you were I think you were looking for something like you described with meditation. You were also interested in act social and applied improvisation. So after this journey, what are some of your insights?
Well, I think the main thing has been personally, I have not been getting as triggered, I guess, by people who I disagree with or things that I can't control. I think I've learned personally a deeper acceptance of, right now there were a lot of people who are just not willing to have a conversation. Like they believe what they believe and they're not going to change their mind, and they don't want to hear anyone else's opinion. They don't want to discuss it. They're not willing to listen. And so, as opposed to being the person who's like, actually, me trying to correct them and try to fix them, I say, you know what? I've got the courage, to sort of change what I can, and the grace to accept what I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference, if you will. And so I just say, okay, well, this is clearly a person that won't be open to a discussion, so there's no point in engaging at all. Whereas before I might get roped into some stupid Facebook, argument or something, you know what I mean? So now it's just like, okay, I'm just not going to post. So I don't, so I was talking to my friend today, like on Facebook, I don't post anything that would be even remotely open to interpretation, if you will. So I don't do any of those posts, but I might post something on my blog and say, oh, I've written a new blog post, if you want to go over to my blog and read that there, because that way it's not one of those things where you get these like comment feeds where you're like, who is this? I haven't talked to you in 10 years and now you're writing some crap on my Facebook wall. So like I don't want to waste my time with stuff like that. So it's like I still blog and I write articles, and then if people care, they'll go to my blog and read that. But it's not the forum where they can get that like jolt of like, oh, I told him, on Facebook. It's like that's been one big thing, is like I've improved my social media etiquette immensely. And then, it's been nice to meet other people that have that same idea. And I hope, at least for them, the applied improviser, the professional applied improviser, who's a practitioner who wants to, spread the gospel of applied improv. I hope that this movie validates them in a way to say, okay, my work is important and valuable. Because I think that they're kind of on the outskirts, especially the drama therapists. A lot of states, it's not even licensed here, drama therapy. It's kind of seen as like this, what is that, sort of thing. By, a psychoanalyst. Like I went on a date like in 2019 with a lady I met on the internet who was a psychoanalyst, like a Freudian psychoanalyst. And we were on the date and I said, oh, so I'm doing a movie about therapy. And she's like, oh yeah, what kind of therapy? I'm like, drama therapy. She's like, isn't that kind of dangerous? And I'm like, why is it more dangerous than what you do? Like there's just like this block from people who are in the mainstream of therapy that, or like, oh, it's for kids or something like, I agree though, drama therapy is not for everyone, but for the people that it is for, it's very, very valuable. So, so I just wanted to validate those people and spread the word that this is going on. And if it interests you, you should check it out.
That's interesting because, Sigmund Freud lived in Vienna, and Jack Moreno, who is one of the founder of drama therapy, was also from Vienna. And then they went to America. And I think, well, from an Austrian standpoint, they're very different kind of therapies. And it's interesting how they are perceived, in the social world. And I think that both have, the right to hopefully heal people or help them at least. Now you did a great journey, and you met many different people from science and practice and arts and therapy. So what is your gut feeling? What is the next step? What do you think? What is coming perhaps in the next years? Do you have an idea what perhaps will emerge in this field?
Well, I think as the scientific research on creativity starts to solidify, you're probably going to see different therapies develop around creativity, which might involve medications or procedures. You put this electron on this part of the brain, and if you stimulate this thing, then the person can overcome their, like the box that they're in mentally. I think there's a lot of stuff on the medical field that'll probably start to happen because of that research. But also I just think in terms of the overall societal use of this for communication, I think that just it's going to become, soft skills in business, I think are going to become a lot more just mandatory. I think for a leader to have, and I think that anyone who seriously wants to be considered for a C-level position in an organization is going to have a, demonstrated proficiency. Like, oh yeah, you can sell lots of widgets, but can you treat your people well enough so that they succeed? I think that's going to just become more and more important. We're already seeing it, but it's definitely not one of those things that it's seen as like, okay, we've got to hit the bottom line, hit our targets, and then if we have time, we'll do a little, improv offsite training for the employees. Whereas I think eventually it's going to become, okay, if we want to succeed, we have to do the improv. We have to do these kinds of things to build our team. So I think it's just going to become more and more prevalent.